So when you're starting out in the world of BDSM, you may be intrigued by dom-sub relationships, but you may feel like there's this whole world underneath the surface that you're missing. BDSM isn't just a game of sex and control. It's an incredible journey of trust, understanding, and emotional depth. Today, we're diving deep into what no one tells you about power exchange relationships. We're going to be debunking common myths and talking about the dirty, daily realities no one talks about, and all the emotional, sexual, and physical connections that make it all worth it. Welcome to the Dom-Sub Living Podcast. But before we begin, I want to tell you about the Dom-Sub Dynamics Virtual Summit I'm hosting. You can grab your ticket at domsubdynamics.com. I'll have the link in the description, but it's a virtual event featuring 20 different speakers in the kink and BDSM space. I'm so excited about this, and you can grab your ticket at domsubdynamics.com. But back to this episode about what no one tells you about dom-sub relationships. So I really wanted to create this episode because when I first started out, there was a lot of things I wasn't expecting on my journey. I started a BDSM relationship with my husband, and so that brought a lot of things to the table that created a lot of conflict because we already had this vanilla relationship and this vanilla foundation that we had to try to figure out how to navigate and bring to the world of BDSM. And so there was a lot of times where I thought, am I doing this right? Am I being a good sub? Am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? Am I having sub frenzy? Or, should we be 24/7? Should we be TPE? And, we had kids, and, how do we make it so that the kids don't know what we're doing? And when you are in a vanilla relationship, like when you start dating or even when you get married, there's so much advice and self-help books and shows and just so much support out there. You have relatives that will help you in your vanilla relationships and friends that are willing to give you advice. And we don't have that, unfortunately, in the kink community because there's this taboo. You can't really talk about it. So there are some resources out there, but definitely not a lot if you're, in a vanilla relationship. Again, there's just, as tons of books and talk shows and everything to help a vanilla relationship, but not a whole lot for a dom-sub one. And so that's why I created this episode, because I just kind of want to normalize BDSM relationships. And that's the whole mission of the company Dom-Sub Living. I really want to make it a way of life because, again, there's just not a whole lot out there. There may be classes and groups, but a lot of it is hard to find. And then, of course, after 50 Shades of Grey came out, that's kind of what everybody thinks of when they think of a dom-sub relationship. So there's not a whole lot for people to look up to and follow and get advice. And so I just wanted to show what a real BDSM relationship could look like. And even though there is some things out there for, kinky people, a lot of it is 101 trainings and workshops, things like how to create a safe word, how to establish your hard and soft limits, how to get started with certain bondage techniques or rope bondage, or how to do wax play. So it's a lot of these like beginner concepts, which is fine for casual playing or when you're just starting out, but it can kind of start to feel like you're this robot or you're this actor. You learn how to do a scene and then you just kind of imitate it and do that scene and do it over and over and over again. There's no, intermediate skills or advanced skills where you're learning to create something for your own relationship, because every relationship is unique. And so it can be really hard to kind of take things to that next level. And all those skills are great. You need those skills to be safe, but building a dom-sub relationship kind of just goes beyond those physical tools and surface level skills, and you really need to start exploring the emotional and psychological aspects and start really, dealing with things like communication, trust, mutual respect. Those are the things that really deepen a dom-sub relationship. And then on top of that, there's always mindset gremlins that no one, prepares you for. If you're taking a class on, a certain 101, bondage skill, it's not gonna like address all those mindset issues, all those deep seated traumas, all the relationship traumas and, religious traumas, all those things. Like, it's not going to address that. So you're never going to be able to truly progress. And plus, even if you learn these skills, there can be a lot that can go wrong during a scene. Of course, scary, dangerous things that can go wrong, but even just like little things that can go wrong that like no one really prepares you for. For example, when me and my dom would first start out, if he was doing like a restraint system or like, rope bondage, like no one like really tells you like what to do during a scene if all of a sudden like those ropes come undone. It's like, do you just keep acting like you're still restrained, or like what do you do? Like when the embarrassing stuff kind of happens, or something doesn't go as planned, like what do you do in those instances? Do you just keep going? Do you say something? And if so, like, how do you say it? So it's all these little nuances that like no one really prepares you for. No one prepares you for like the reality. It's just like, a surface level, this is what a scene is, this is how you do bondage, but there's a lot of real life stuff that can happen, and a lot of embarrassing stuff too. And then of course there's what happens if you get triggered. And so this is something that I dealt with too. As our scenes got more and more intense, they started, really triggering me. And then we started, getting kind of onto the borderline of consensual non-consent play, even though we didn't realize that we were venturing into CNC. So it's like, what do you do then? It's like these things that no one prepares you for. So having that emotional foundation is so important. So that way, when things don't go as planned, when things are embarrassing, when things are traumatic, that you have those things, that foundation to rely on. Because having physical skills is important, but you need like a way deeper connection to really stand the test of time. And there's just this huge difference in how the BDSM lifestyle is portrayed versus reality. And not just in movies, like in 50 Shades of Grey, but, even at dungeons and events. It's like, for one, there's never any awkward moments. Everything is going exactly as planned. It looks like everyone's having this amazing, life-shattering, fulfilling experience. I remember the first time I saw a live scene at a BDSM dungeon. It just looked like so perfect. Everything was so smooth. And yes, they did practice beforehand, but it built up so perfectly. The dom would do something, the submissive would immediately respond. And again, that's not always real life. The dom may do something and the submissive may not respond. But so I was in this dungeon watching this scene, and it just progressed so perfectly, and then, of course, in the end, the submissive orgasms on cue, and it's, whether that's real or not, but it just can make someone who's new and starting out feel like, well, that's how it has to go every time. You have this perfect scene where the dom leads, the submissive responds perfectly, and then it's just in this huge crescendo. And it's like a performance. And, that's what I witnessed in this dungeon, was an actual performance. But so someone can come away from that thinking, well, the scenes that I do with my partner in the comfort of my own home, they need to be a performance too in this huge, production. And that's not really realistic or fair to yourself or your partner either. And when you start talking to others in the lifestyle, you may feel like, well, gee, it sounds like everybody likes bondage, everybody likes pain, everybody likes giving pain or receiving pain. Everybody just seems like this is how it goes. And you may hear things like, well, you're not a real sub unless you do this, or, people may say like, you're not a real dom unless you can, make your sub orgasm on command or things like that. So you may have been told things even by people in the BDSM community that just kind of makes you feel almost like less than, or that you're not really a dom or sub. Another thing I hear a lot from, my students is, how do I get into Subspace? Because they see scenes or they hear people talk about how, they're always, they get into Subspace, every time they do a scene, or their dom knows how to get them to Subspace. Or, I have doms ask me like, how do I get my sub to Subspace? It seems like, between like orgasms and Subspace and crying, that's another one I hear. How do I get my sub to cry? Or, how, if you're a sub, like, I want to get to the point where I'm crying. It's like, it seems like these are these goals that are put on ourselves to perform, whether we hear about it or we see about it from others. But, even if you have this amazing scene, no one really talks about the work that you did, like outside the bedroom with your partner, all the conversations that you had, all the negotiation you did, all the trial and error that you did to get there. It just looks like this beautiful, intense scene that just seemed to happen because these two people just know each other so well and they can read each other's minds. But in reality, the lifestyle isn't just about sex. It's not even really about power play. It's about the connection. It's about exploring. It's about personal growth, for you and your partner and the relationship. But it seems like there's always just this focus on the scene and how to create a scene, how to make the scene amazing, how, to have your next scene even better. And, I know I even talk about those things too, because it is important. But again, we need to make sure we're being realistic about it and also talking about the foundation that you need, like outside the bedroom, that helps create that scene. So these would be things like aftercare, negotiation, consent. And a lot of times these things are overlooked, or even if they're talked about, they're not talked about in like the same intensity or the same excitement that, creating a scene or having a total power exchange relationship are often talked about in the lifestyle. So growing as a dom or sub, really depends on you overcoming a lot of challenges. And especially if you're a new dom or you're a new sub, you're going to have to overcome a lot of challenges, unfortunately. And it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to look different for each individual. But when it comes to challenges, a lot of times we only hear about, the sexy things like how to find a partner, how to create a scene, punishments, protocols, again, all the sexy stuff, all the surface level stuff too. But no one talks about, okay, well, how do you improve as a dom or sub if you're feeling overwhelmed? How do you improve if you have emotional issues, or if you have a busy schedule, if you have kids, if you have ADHD? My dom, he deals with ADHD. And so that has been something that we've had to overcome and figure out. But, these are all the non-sexy things that it seems like no one wants to talk about. Another thing that I've had to overcome is just dealing with envy and even jealousy. Seeing other people and how they play, really made me feel insecure at a lot of times. And just, especially on social media, seeing even other educators and, all the amazing, crazy things that they're doing, made me feel a little less than too. And so one of the things I've had to do to overcome that is just limit my time on social media. And that's something that my dom helps enforce. We have time limits on my phone. So that's like one of our rules. And if I go over, there's punishments involved with that. So that's something that, I'm still always having to work on. Another thing I've had to struggle with, and you may struggle with too, is just dealing with society's taboos around the lifestyle. Worrying that your children are going to find out, that your relatives, family members are going to find out. Even dealing with things like, when I wear my collar, worrying about if someone asks in public, what is that? Is that some type of, religious necklace, or, that's just like an odd necklace to wear? Like, I'm, worrying that, oh, do people know that this means, I'm into BDSM and things like that. So it's just, again, like all these little things like we worry about and, inhibit us from really growing in the lifestyle that we don't really talk about because we're focused on all the sexy stuff, like, finding a partner and having scenes. And so we just need a more rounded and balanced approach. So if you are struggling with any of those things or any of the things I haven't even mentioned, because like I said, we're all different, and you probably have struggles that, I don't know about, and, only you know about. But, if you're dealing with something, know that you're not alone and your struggles are valid. But the way we overcome these things is all the same way, just education, relying on community, having open dialogue, but just focusing on transforming your relationship by discovering new skills, and not just new kinky skills, but more the mindset skills too. And just, communicating with your partner and just making sure that your needs and wants are a priority, and that you're working together with your partner too and helping them fulfill their needs and wants as well. So let's say you want to take your dom-sub relationship out of the bedroom and into your daily life. Well, that's going to take a ton of work because we have jobs, we have health issues, we have, children, and we have pets, and we have to deal with our family members. So it is going to take a ton of work. And again, unfortunately, not a lot of people are talking about these things. I remember when I first started out, there was like an online group, I think on Facebook or something, and they had this rule like absolutely no mentioning any minors, or even like the existence of minors in this group, because it was a BDSM group. And we totally get not having minors in kink, that, BDSM is supposed to be practiced by consenting adults, but this group like took it to the next level. Like, you couldn't ask any questions about, say you had kids, and asking other people like, hey, how do you make sure that like your kids don't hear you when you're having a scene? Like, they would delete it and block it because you mentioned kids in a BDSM group. They even did things like you couldn't even talk about when you were a kid. So like if you said like, hey, I dealt with these sexual traumas as a kid, and I'm having a hard time navigating that as an adult, like they would delete the comment because you mentioned kids in the comment. So, it can be hard when, there's groups out there with their their own rules and their own gatekeeping about what you can and cannot talk about. And, of course, that's like an extreme case where, again, they, just act like even the existence of kids, wasn't even a thing. But, it can be hard to find a place where you feel welcome. And so that's why in this podcast, I've shared like a ton of practical steps to incorporate the dynamic into your everyday life and just how to make it a fulfilling part of your relationship, how to deal with BDSM relationships when you have health problems, when you're in long distance relationships, when, a partner has to work out of town. I've talked about that, dealing with kids and, so that's why, the aim of this, whole podcast and Dom Sub Living as a whole is just to really show real BDSM relationships in a practical way. And if you want even more resources for how to make your Dom Sub relationship, or even just how to be a Dom or how to be a sub in a more practical way and in your everyday life, definitely check out our virtual summit coming up at domsubdynamics.com, because there's going to be a ton of resources all about that. So you're not going to want to miss it. But I know that there is just a ton of creepy and scary sites on the internet and people on the internet. I hear so many horror stories of people saying, I posted that I was a new submissive and all of a sudden now I have 5 DOMs in my DMs saying, well, I can train you and I can mentor you. I always think that's cute. I can mentor you by, making you do all these sexual things for me. But so always be careful. There's so much like creepiness out there and it can be really hard to navigate and know like where to turn to for real practical guidance. And it's definitely not just me who's teaching these things. It's not just Dom Sub Living. I don't have a monopoly on this information, I always say. So that's why, even with the virtual summit, I've teamed up with 20 other educators in the BDSM space. And they are just amazing. And they are sharing quality information that will really help you on your journey. Because a Dom sub relationship, it should be fun. I mean, it should be fun. It should be kinky. It should be sexy. It should be all those things, but it's about more than just the kink and the sex. It's about building a lasting and evolving dynamic that enriches both you and your partner. And a real and fulfilling Dom sub relationship and, BDSM lifestyle should be full of the good, bad, and ugly. All those weird nuances should be happening. If you had a perfect relationship or you were a perfect Dom or sub or had all these amazing scenes, I would worry for you a little bit. Like, I would feel like it's almost like superficial and there's no real foundation. Like, you should be making mistakes. You should be having awkward moments. You should be struggling. It's just how we overcome these struggles that really matters and really shows, how strong we really are as a Dom or sub. And I know there's a lot of misconceptions about BDSM, but I just really wanted to share today the lesser known aspects of Dom sub relationships. So I really encourage you to approach your Dom sub relationship with an open heart, with an open mind, and just be ready to explore and learn and grow on your beautiful journey. Thank you for joining me and being a part of the Dom Sub Living community. You can check out all of the details and links for this episode in the description and show notes. And be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.